I want to just say one more thing before we leave Joseph. We've looked at the story detail by detail. We've looked at how it might have been told and then written down. We've looked at rhetorical tools that might have been used. And we've looked at parallel stories in the ancient Near East. We've even looked at the politics of the ancient Near East and ways that the New Testament interpreted the story of Jesus through the story of Joseph. But what do we do with Joseph? What does his story have to offer us? What can we take from the story of Joseph to shape our own life and our own life of faith? I'll offer two things. First, when we look at Joseph, we should see someone who endured a lot of pain, a lot of grief, a man who lost an awful lot over and over again. And those losses, those moments of grief, were not moments when God had abandoned him. They weren't moments when God was punishing him or God had forgotten about him. They weren't moments that expressed faithlessness or sinfulness in Joseph. Joseph had to endure those moments of loss to eventually come to the moments when he would know victory and redemption. The story of Joseph, the story which sees Joseph be used by God to save perhaps hundreds of thousands of people from famine, needed him to be forsaken by his brothers, be sold into slavery, be falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, and be thrown into jail. Had one of those horrible moments in his life not had happened, he would not have been in the position that he needed to be to save the many nations of people. As we've looked at the story, I think we've also seen that Joseph needed to mature. He went from rather cluelessly telling his family about his self-serving dreams to having the fortitude to run a country. He didn't just grow through his successes. He grew in the pit. He grew in Potiphar's house. He grew in prison. In Joseph, we should see someone who absolutely thrived, not just despite his worst moments, but because of them. Second, at his core, Joseph is someone who God spoke to and someone who listened. God spoke to him in dreams and let God's voice speak to him. We've all had strange dreams, and we've all woken up and said to ourselves, wow, that was weird. Okay, what's next? Joseph didn't do that. Now, by looking at the many stories of the Bible, dreams aren't the only way that God speaks to people. Obviously, God spoke to Moses in a burning bush. God spoke to Gideon when he found dew on a fleece of wool one day and then found a dry fleece of wool the next day. God spoke to Mary through the visit of an angel. God spoke to Hannah by answering her heartfelt prayer. God spoke to Paul in a blinding light that knocked him off his horse. God spoke to the centurion when he saw Jesus on the cross. These stories, I think, all tell us that God speaks to us, and they all speak of people who are willing to listen to God's voice. I think one of the abiding messages of the story of Joseph is a reminder to be quiet and listen. If we've incorporated prayer into our daily lives, remember to not just talk and talk and talk and talk. Let God get a word in edgewise. Listen for God's voice. Listen and look for God's gentle guidance. If Joseph had had those dreams of the stars and wheat bowing down to him and had just discounted it as the weird dreams that follow a night of spicy food, then this would have been a very short story that would have ended in tragedy for an entire region of the world. But Joseph tells us to listen for that still, small voice, even when we find ourselves at the bottom of a pit.